In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear wheel bearing on this Subaru Crosstrek. Located behind your rear brakes, let's get started. Use a 19mm socket, pull off all 5 lug nuts, and then remove the wheel. The axle nut is locked in, so I'm going to take a chisel and put it right into this slot of the axle, and with a hammer punch this out so it can be easier to remove. That's good right here. Now take a 32mm axle nut socket and remove this axle nut. Keep in mind these can be fairly tight, so if you're doing this by hand with a breaker bar, it could be helpful to have a pry bar between the lug studs to hold this hub from spinning as you try to rotate the axle nut and break it free. There it is. At this point, you want to make sure that the axle can push through the hub and it's not seized in there. This one's perfectly fine. If yours was, you would take a punch right in the center here with a hammer and tap it. If you don't have a punch, put the axle nut back on nice and flush and use this as a flat surface to hammer on to break it free. Now from the back side of the caliper, let's remove the 2 17mm bolts holding the caliper and bracket assembly onto the knuckle so we can move this out of our way. Once again, 17mm socket. With this most of the way out, I'm actually going to leave it in a few threads so it can hold the caliper and bracket while I remove the lower. Take this off. Remove the upper one as well. And now you can remove your caliper. And in order to not hang it by the brake hose, I'm going to put it right on the upper control arm. Now remove the rotor. If yours is seized, of course make sure the parking brake isn't engaged in holding it on. But if yours is actually seized, tap between the lug studs and that should break it free. Take that off and set it aside. There are 4 bolts in total holding this wheel bearing onto the knuckle, 14mm socket on all 4. Let's remove them all. Now from the front, grab the wheel bearing, hold the backing plate. Hopefully they separate like they did for me. Sometimes they'll be stuck together and the whole thing will come off as an assembly. Unfortunately, if that's the case, you're going to have to pull it off just as an assembly, tilt it down, and tap the wheel bearing out from the back side. For me, I'm able to simply pull out on the wheel bearing. Try to keep these separated the best you can. And there is the wheel bearing and hub assembly. Here's that backing shield with the parking brake shoes and the hardware. We'll let this hang over here, do some cleaning, and there it is. Remove the backing plate with the parking brake and everything. Do a little bit of cleaning on the back side. Looks like I have some anti-seize here from the previous repair that required this to be removed, which is great. We can let that hang, and now you can very carefully push the axle, clean out the knuckle where the wheel bearing mounts. If you have excessive corrosion, you want to sand this area down, making sure it's nice and flat. Mine is not corroded at all. It's actually coated in anti-seize, which is great. I will, however, wipe this off and apply some new anti-seize. That way it stays nice and fresh and corrosion free. I'm going to also wipe off the axle. We'll apply some more anti-seize to that when we reinstall. If you need a wire brush for this or a sanding disc, use it. Just don't take away too much material by sanding too far. Apply a thin coating of anti-seize on the area that you cleaned. You just don't want any bare metal exposed. Try not to get any on the ABS sensor though. It's all right if it gets touched with the brush, but just try to wipe it off. Keep that clean so it can take a good reading of that wheel bearing as it's operating. Just do the same over here, once again, to prevent corrosion from building up. Put a little bit of anti-seize on the splines of the axle. This will prevent it from getting stuck in the hub in the future. You don't need a lot. It'll actually just get pushed off as you install the hub if you put too much. Try to avoid getting it on the threads though. You want this torque to be a dry torque and not impacted or altered by the anti-seize removing friction. So at this point, grab your wheel bearing, slide it in, line everything up. All right, let's get the bolts in. Let's install the mounting bolts from the back side. Try to get everything lined up. Make sure it starts smoothly into the threads. All right. And now we'll snug them up in a cross pattern to seat the wheel bearing evenly. With all of them being bottomed out and snugged up in a cross pattern, I'm just going to go around in a circle and torque them to 63 foot-pounds. Double check them if you want, and this is torqued. Let's reinstall the axle nut at this point. Yeah, you could wait, but putting this on and torquing it without the rotor in the way leaves us more room for a pry bar in here to hold the hub from spinning. Let's tighten it up with that 32mm socket. The torque for this is 140 foot-pounds. Put the pry bar in, holding it through the studs and the torque wrench. That's 140 right there. Let's stake it to lock it in. Use a chisel and a hammer. That's all you need. Let's apply some anti-seize to the surface of the hub. This way the rotor doesn't get stuck on here in the future, and this also prevents corrosion. You don't want to put too much, because if you put a thick layer on here, it's actually going to squeeze out when you apply the rotor, and that is going to get on the surface of where the parking brake shoes ride. That would not be good. But focus on covering this inner ring of the hub and just a thin layer on the rest of it, right on the face of the hub. Once again, this will prevent corrosion and will prevent the rotor from seizing on. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs. If you get it on them, no big deal, just wipe it off, but don't lather them on. If your rotor is rusty on the backside where it mounts, clean it off. You don't want any rust preventing it from seating all the way, and then install it. Get your caliper, line it back up with the rotor, and slide it on. Have your bolts ready, line those up, and start them in. Snug them up. And we'll torque them to 80 foot-pounds. All right. Let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 5 lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, torque them to 89 foot-pounds. Once again, 89 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Double check them. There you have it. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.